Hello, everyone. Welcome to our online video series, Reading Hope in Trying Times. Our guest today is the Reverend Lydia E. Munoz. Lydia is an ordained elder in the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference of the United Methodist Church and is a dynamic and experienced pastor developing new church starts. She's passionate community advocate, trained therapist, and renowned musician. Pastor Lydia has extensive experience serving with multicultural settings, has a deep commitment to serving Latino and immigrant communities, and a heart for engaging young people. Pastor Lydia has been part of creating and designing worship for the World Council of Churches in South Korea and has led and designed worship for various local, jurisdictional, and national conferences and events. She's a graduate of Wesley Theological Seminary and Penn State University. As part of this interview series, we also spoke with her husband, the Reverend Jim McIntyre. So it's really glad to have you here with us today, Lydia. Thanks for joining us.
Wonderful to be with you. Thank you for inviting me.
So maybe you could just start by sharing what your thoughts are on the health crisis that we're going through.
Oh, wow. Well, this is, I'm sure you've heard this word thousands of times, unprecedented. Really devastating in so many ways. Devastating because when we hear the numbers of people who are being affected and being and dying of this, it is really hard to take a number like 10,000 or 20,000 or now 80,000 and put that kind of in perspective. But when it becomes our neighbor or it becomes our parishioner, for me, when it becomes family members, then that number becomes so personal, right? And that's when it really starts to hit you. So in pastoral work, that those very real connections are the moments where the pandemic is becoming like really real, tangible. Well, not so much tangible because we can't touch anything, but tangible in terms of your heart and your body and your soul and your mind, all those things. I also think the pandemic is kind of, uncovering, if you will, this underside, this underbelly of our country that's just frankly a hidden virus, a virus of racism, a virus of classism, a virus of just a misunderstanding of what does it mean to have my freedoms respected, and equal freedoms respected, and what does that mean? How do we mutually care for one another? So all of that is, I think the pandemic is just kind of turning things upside down to help to make us see, this is really, this has been here the whole time, and maybe we've never seen it, and it takes us to wear a mask in order to see it. Interesting.
It's certainly crazy times in a lot of different ways.
I know.
So, being, in a church leadership situation like you're in, what kinds of things have you had to do there to adjust to all of this?
So, so first of all is, the place that many people consider as sanctuary is not sanctuary right now because it's full of bacteria that need to be cleaned down. So there's, where people find sanctuary is really becoming the big question. But I also think that what we're learning, at least in my community of faith, is that perhaps this is the way that the church is not closed, it's actually deployed. Sanctuary is much more expansive. It's much more, it's broader. And I think we're beginning to learn, at least in my community of faith, we're beginning to learn that wherever 2 or 3 Zoomers are together, there's sanctuary and there's God's presence.
There you go. Amen.
Yeah. So it's quite remarkable, but I mean, still the notion of wanting to get together. So here in Pennsylvania, we're in this county, we're still in the red phase. So which means that we can't come together to worship. And we're going to slowly move into the yellow phase, which means we could potentially come together, but only at a certain percentage, like 25% or something like that, which means that it's like 30 people max in your sanctuary. And so we've got to be like, which 30 people do we invite? And
Yeah,
what if
that's
visitors come?
impossible.
Yeah,
You
that's
can't make a
virtually
choice like that.
impossible. And given the fact that, I mean, I know this is the reality of a lot of mainline denominations, is that the folks that, the population of folks that come to church are, 60 and above. And so they feel a little more, even more precarious, right? They're in a
Of
more precarious.
course. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've got people telling me, Pastor, I don't know if I'm going to come back to the church for the next 2 years. I think I'll do the virtual. So the way it's impacted us is just having to really sit down and think about, okay, what's going to be the new definition of this gathered community moving forward? Will we have to remain, even if we come together in the church space, in the building space at a limited capacity, we will always have to remain with some Zoom or video presence because the vast majority of people will not come.
I think that's going to be true for a long time.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a reality for a lot of people. So that's changed the way that we do, the way that we care for each other. That I've been blessed to see how people have responded. So recently, folks did, in our local community, we have 3 area food banks and food security places. And we, people are just responding saying, oh my gosh, there's a big need out there. And so how do we respond? And giving above, people turning in their stimulus checks. I mean, that's pretty amazing, right? And so as much as the pandemic has unleashed this, there's an ugly side, right? The pandemic has also unleashed our ability or our capability for compassion. So that's a remarkable thing.
I mean, isn't it amazing in times of stress, kind of like the true colors come out one way or the other?
Yes, one way or another. That's right.
It's what it seems like is happening.
That's right. That's right.
But are you feeling like an enhanced level of compassion and empathy toward, like, for instance, healthcare workers or other people who, literally on the so-called front lines of what's going on?
Yeah, I think we're having really good conversation. At least this is forcing us to have a really good conversation on what we mean by essential workers.
Exactly.
So essential workers that basically have always been putting their self in our service, and we've never, like the people who collect our trash, the people who are stocking our grocery stores, the people who are serving us in the drive-through at McDonald's, the people who are, so all of a sudden, all these people, I mean, it doesn't feel like an essential thing. Do I really need those fries? But sometimes, just saying, sometimes in order to get through a day, I kind of need a fry from McDonald's. So I'm glad that person is there. And so how we engage with that reality. So yeah, the hospital workers are on the front line, and it's not just the nurses and the doctors, which is really important. The aides, the people who clean the hospital, who are often overlooked and underpaid. this September will be a year that my father passed, and he was, the last months of his life, he was in a nursing facility. Most of the people that cared for my father were, minimum wage workers, black and brown, and they were underpaid, but they were doing this incredible service for my father. They were caring for the most precious of our individuals. Jim has talked, of course, at length about Lindsay, and the people who have served Lindsay the most and the best have been the people who are often underlooked and underpaid. And so this conversation of essentials has become, who we consider essentials, and maybe it's Jesus's words of the last shall be first and the first shall be last coming to fruition, right? Where I'm hoping that we as a country will wake up to the fact that I'm willing to pay that nurse's aide and that garbage collector good, decent living wage, because they are essential to me. They are essential.
Let's hope that is one of the outcomes.
I know.
So one of the things we're talking about in this whole interview series is basically how God's, supported us in challenging times in the past and how we've been able to draw on that now. So what are your thoughts in that regard?
Well, for me, I grew up around music. That was a go-to for us. And it has always been, there's always been a song that has gone along with every moment in my life, kind of like a soundtrack playing in the background of my life. And so a lot of times, things that I can't express verbally or even in a prayer, I can do singing or listening to music, which is another form of prayer, actually. So that has been a great source of strength and comfort, always, in every time. I remember, I'm a church planter's kid, missionary's kid. So we lived in all kinds of places, and one of those places was Guatemala. And we lived in 1976, there was a huge earthquake that rocked Guatemala. It was like 8 on the Richter scale. It was devastating. And I remember the things that gathered the community was coming together to sing, and sing songs that were not charted, not put in a hymnal. They were songs that the community knew, that the community just kind of had adopted and had passed on from generation to generation. And those were the songs that sustained them in this devastating time. And so recovering that way of that therapeutic approach of what it does. What's really hard is the fact that as we begin to think about coming back together, singing is the last thing that they want us to do.
You're right. Yeah. Look at that one church that
I know
had that huge percentage of people that got the virus.
Exactly. It is the worst way of gathering people. So, the possibility is either, everybody wears a mask and you try to sing with that, or you just don't sing. And so that's going to be challenging, because particularly for our denomination, our tradition of Methodist, singing is how we tell the story. Singing is how we tell the theology of the Methodist Church. That's, it's basically in song. So we're a singing people. So it's going to be hard. But that's one of the ways. Listening, I also think that it's not just, what's remarkable now is finding ways to listen to music that's outside of the circle of faith, if you will. I think it's another expression of faith. I don't buy that whole division of secular, sacred. I think anything that comes from your soul is sacred. So lately we've been kind of introducing stuff from Godspell, believe it or not, into our worship experience, because some of the words, some of the music is just so relevant for this particular
Absolutely. Yeah.
time. So yeah, that's one of the ways that has sustained me, um, you know.
So Lydia, what kind of music or other, resources can you suggest to people to help them get through this?
So yeah, I think there's a lot that we can learn from the global community. Um, there are songs that are forged in fire, if you will. There are songs that are forged in the midst of civil war, songs that are forged in the midst of other pandemics and poverty and all those things that come from communities of faith beyond our borders, if you will, that really know how to sing into resistance, know how to sing into or lean into with their music into resilience, right? I remember one song that I learned from actually from Desmond Tutu when I went to South Africa. And he talked about this song about goodness is stronger than evil, love is stronger than hate. And then John Bell from the Iona community took it and arranged music for it. And love is stronger than hate, light is stronger than darkness, and the victory is ours through Christ who loved us. And he talked about how this verse was important during a time of apartheid, during this moment of apartheid. And so I think some of the best songs of resilience come out of communities that know what they're talking about, that know what, they've walked this walk, right? So I definitely think global um, music is important. So things like Global Praise, the General Board of Global Ministries used to have these books called for the church. In fact, I might have one around here because I always do. And Global Praise for the work for the church and for worship. They were kind of like this. They came 1, 2, and 3, and they're great resources for communities who want to learn how to sing new songs of resilience.
That's a
Amazing.
great idea.
Yeah. Other resources, of course, you can never go wrong with Taizé. Never, ever, ever. One, because it's about repetition, right? And so repetition is the best way to teach by rote. And this whole notion that we have to have a song sheet in front of us or a hymnal in front of us, like almost like a security blanket. I get that some of us like to read the music and some of us can, but a vast majority of people cannot. And so singing by a repetition is just a wonderful way of freeing us up to embrace the words that we're singing. Paul always said, you sing in spirit and in truth. So what does that mean? If I'm saying, I want to be a Christian in my heart, if I'm singing that, it means that I really do want to be a Christian in my heart. And so it means I'm going to have to treat my neighbor like I really want to be a Christian in my heart, So there's this whole thing. So there's something about learning songs by memory, right? That just become constant prayers. And Taizé music gives us that. It really does. So I definitely a big supporter of that. I'm also a big supporter of, so there's so many freedom and justice songs that come from, not just from the 60s, but come from an era even before that of what Ruby Sales would call Black theology, right? Where they come from the spirituals, right? That also are are repetition. They come from communities that have struggled. Nobody wrote this down, until later, right? But these are communities that learned how to sing their prophetic imagination into, right? They learned how to sing about their freedom before they were free. And so songs like "Oh Freedom," "Ride On King Jesus," those songs, I'm gonna live so God could use me. Songs that seem simple, but deep. They're deep. They're deeply rooted in communities that believe when things were really, really, really tough and really terrible, actually. So it seems like those songs need to be resurfaced again as we continue to confront racism in this country, right? Those songs need to be that Black theology, that liberation theology needs to be sung again, because we've got to get people thinking conscientiously, not just my vertical relationship with God, which unfortunately there has been such a clamor for music that is about, praise and worship. But for me, praise and worship is best when it's a corporate experience. So I can't just sing about, oh God, how I love you, I love you, I love you, this way, without singing, and I love my neighbor. And this is all of us. And we come together to worship you. We come together because in my we, I'm proclaiming you are part of me. In my we, I'm proclaiming the world is part of me. So it's just really important, I think, all those kinds of resources.
Wonderful. Each one of these interviews that I do, brings a different perspective, than the next. And since you're one of the few people who's a musician, that I've interviewed. I've interviewed mostly authors. So, it's really great to hear, your perspective on this, which is just wonderful.
Great. Thank you.
Well, Lydia, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you taking some time and sharing your thoughts and your ideas on music and all these different things that can help us through trying times. So thanks a lot.
It's a pleasure. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me, and everyone just stay safe and keep singing.
There you go. Great advice.
Thanks.